When the three-star general asked the young lieutenant what she was doing in the judge's chair, everyone started laughing. Instead of saying, "military law graduate," she remained silent. But when that general was the defendant in his own war crimes trial and she pulled out her ID card to show her real rank, the entire courtroom froze. This story reveals how assumptions about age, gender, and authority can blind us to true expertise and what happens when the most powerful person in the room turns out to be the one everyone underestimated. The morning mist hung over Fort Leavenworth as a nondescript sedan pulled up to the military courthouse. From the passenger seat emerged a woman in her early 30s, wearing the standard dress uniform of a first lieutenant. Her name tape read Martinez, and her bearing suggested competence without ostentation. Lieutenant Sofia Martinez carried herself with quiet confidence as she walked toward the imposing brick building that housed the military's most significant legal proceedings. To the guards at the entrance, she appeared to be just another junior officer reporting for duty at one of the Army's most prestigious legal facilities. Inside, the courthouse buzzed with the controlled energy of high-stakes military justice. Today's docket included several significant cases, but one stood out above all others: the court-martial of Lieutenant General Robert "Iron Mike" Harrison, a decorated three-star general accused of war crimes during operations in Eastern Europe. The case had sent shockwaves through the military hierarchy. General Harrison wasn't just any officer. He was a legend, a combat veteran with 4 decades of service and a reputation for uncompromising leadership. The charges against him included ordering attacks on civilian targets and covering up the deaths of non-combatants during classified operations. As Lieutenant Martinez made her way through the security checkpoints, she observed the gravity of the situation. The courthouse was filled with high-ranking officers, Pentagon officials, and media representatives from around the world. This wasn't just a trial, it was a test of the military justice system's ability to hold its most powerful leaders accountable. What nobody knew was that the quiet lieutenant walking through their midst carried credentials that would shock everyone in the building. The military courtroom was a study in formal authority. Dark wood paneling lined the walls, adorned with portraits of distinguished military leaders and the symbols of American military justice. At the front of the room sat the judge's bench, elevated and imposing, with the American flag and military branch flags flanking it on either side. As court personnel prepared for the day's proceedings, Lieutenant Martinez took her place at a small table near the judge's bench. She opened a briefcase and began reviewing documents with the methodical precision of someone thoroughly familiar with complex legal procedures. Captain James Walsh, the lead prosecutor, noticed her immediately. "Lieutenant," he called out, "I don't think you're supposed to be at the counsel table. This is a general officer court-martial, only senior legal staff authorized." Martinez looked up calmly. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Walsh frowned. "I've never seen you before. What's your background? How long have you been practicing military law?" "Long enough," she replied, returning to her documents. The exchange caught the attention of other officers in the room. Whispers began to circulate about the young lieutenant, who seemed to think she belonged at the center of the most important military trial in years. Colonel Patricia Stone, the chief defense counsel, approached Walsh. "Who's the lieutenant? She looks like she just graduated from law school." "Claims she's supposed to be here," Walsh replied skeptically. "Probably some kind of administrative error. We should have her removed before General Harrison arrives." But before anyone could take action, the bailiff called the room to attention. "All rise. The defendant will be escorted into the courtroom." The doors opened, and Lieutenant General Robert Harrison entered the courtroom. Even in the dress uniform prescribed for defendants, he commanded attention. At 6'3", with silver hair and bearing that spoke of 4 decades of military leadership, Harrison was the epitome of a career soldier. 3 stars gleamed on his shoulders, representing the culmination of a distinguished career that had taken him from second lieutenant to one of the Army's most senior commanders. Harrison's eyes immediately swept the courtroom, taking in the assembled officers, lawyers, and observers. His gaze lingered on the prosecution table, then moved to his defense team, and finally settled on Lieutenant Martinez, sitting at what appeared to be the judge's table. He stopped in his tracks. "What is this?" Harrison's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. "Who authorized a lieutenant to sit at the bench for my court-martial?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Several officers in the gallery chuckled, sharing Harrison's apparent disbelief that such a junior officer would be involved in proceedings of this magnitude. Captain Walsh stepped forward. "Sir, we're trying to resolve that situation. There seems to be some kind of administrative error." Harrison interrupted, his voice rising. "This is a general officer court-martial. I have 4 decades of service to this country, 3 combat deployments and commendations from every theater of operations where American forces have served. And you're telling me my case is being handled by someone who looks like she graduated from law school last week?" The laughter in the courtroom grew louder. Even some of the court personnel seemed to share the general's incredulity. Martinez remained seated, her expression unchanged. She didn't defend herself, didn't explain her presence, didn't react to the mockery rippling through the room. Her silence seemed to fuel the general's indignation. This is exactly what's wrong with today's military, Harrison continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the courtroom. No respect for experience, no understanding of command authority. They put children in positions of responsibility and wonder why standards have declined. Colonel Stone, emboldened by the general's outburst and the supportive murmurs from the gallery, approached Martinez's table. "Lieutenant, with all due respect, this courtroom is reserved for senior legal personnel. Perhaps you should check with your commanding officer about where you're supposed to be." Martinez looked up calmly. "I've checked. I'm in the right place. Do you have any idea who you're dealing with?" Stone gestured toward Harrison. "General Harrison has more time in service than you've been alive. He's commanded divisions in combat, advised the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and earned the respect of military leaders around the world. This case requires experience and judgment that come from years of practice." "I understand the stakes," Martinez replied quietly. Harrison stepped closer, his voice taking on the tone he'd used to command soldiers in combat zones. "Lieutenant, I don't know what strings were pulled to get you into this courtroom, but this is not the place for on-the-job training. I demand that this court be presided over by someone with the appropriate rank and experience." The courtroom fell silent, waiting for Martinez's response. Every eye was on the young lieutenant, who seemed impossibly calm in the face of such overwhelming criticism from one of the military's most senior leaders. Finally, Martinez stood. Her movement was deliberate, controlled, and somehow commanded attention despite her apparent junior status. "General Harrison," she said, her voice clear and carrying surprising authority, "I appreciate your concerns about experience and qualifications." She reached into her briefcase and withdrew a leather credential case. "Perhaps you'd like to review my credentials before we proceed." Martinez opened the credential case and placed it on the table where Harrison could see it. The general leaned forward, expecting to see the standard identification of a junior legal officer. Instead, his eyes widened as he read the contents. The ID card read, "Colonel Sofia Martinez, United States Army." But below that, in smaller print that made Harrison's face go pale, "Judge, U.S. Army Court of Criminal Appeals." And below that, the credential that stopped his breath entirely, "Chief Judge, U.S. Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces." The silence in the courtroom was profound. Harrison stared at the credentials, reading them again as if they might change. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces was the highest military appeals court in the nation, the final arbiter of military justice. Its chief judge was one of the most powerful judicial positions in the entire military system. "I believe," Martinez said quietly, "that should address your concerns about experience and qualifications." The general's face went through a series of expressions: shock, confusion, and dawning realization. Around the courtroom, those close enough to see the credentials began whispering urgently to their neighbors. Captain Walsh stepped forward, his own expression one of complete bewilderment. "Ma'am, I don't understand. Your uniform shows lieutenant rank." "That's correct," Martinez replied. "I'm conducting an undercover evaluation of military justice proceedings at the trial court level. The Chief of Staff and the Secretary of the Army authorized this investigation following concerns about potential bias in high-profile cases." She turned to address the entire courtroom, her voice carrying new authority that seemed to transform her presence entirely. "For the past 6 months, I've been observing military legal proceedings while wearing the uniform of a junior officer. The purpose was to evaluate whether military courts maintain appropriate standards of justice regardless of the perceived status of presiding officers." The change in the courtroom's atmosphere was immediate and dramatic. Officers who had been smirking moments before now stood at attention. The casual disrespect that had characterized the general's outburst evaporated, replaced by the rigid formality appropriate when addressing one of the military's most senior judicial officers. General Harrison, to his credit, immediately snapped to attention. "Ma'am, I apologize for my comments. I had no knowledge of your true identity or the nature of this evaluation." "At ease, General," Martinez replied. "Your reaction was precisely what this evaluation was designed to observe. Please, take your seat. We have important business to conduct." As Harrison moved to the defendant's table, Martinez addressed the broader courtroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you witnessed today is exactly why this evaluation was necessary. The assumption that judicial competence correlates with apparent rank, age, or gender represents a fundamental misunderstanding of military justice principles." She paused, letting her words sink in. "For the record, I have served as a military judge for 12 years, presided over more than 400 court-martial proceedings, and authored 150 published decisions on military law. I hold advanced degrees from Harvard Law School and the Naval War College, and I have been confirmed by the United States Senate for my current position." Colonel Stone raised her hand hesitantly. "Ma'am, how should we proceed with the trial?" "We proceed exactly as we would with any court-martial," Martinez replied. "General Harrison is entitled to a fair trial before an impartial tribunal, regardless of his rank or the nature of the charges. That's the foundation of military justice." She moved to take her place at the judge's bench, and her entire bearing transformed. Gone was any trace of the uncertain lieutenant. In her place stood a judicial officer whose authority was
was unmistakable. "This court is now in session," she announced. "The case of United States versus Lieutenant General Robert Harrison will proceed." What followed was a masterclass in military jurisprudence. Martinez presided over the proceedings with a combination of legal expertise, judicial temperament, and command presence that left no doubt about her qualifications. During opening statements, she maintained perfect impartiality, ruling on objections with precision and ensuring that both prosecution and defense had equal opportunity to present their cases. When complex legal issues arose, her rulings were swift, well-reasoned, and cited relevant precedents from military appellate courts. General Harrison, now fully aware of whom he was facing, conducted himself with appropriate military courtesy. But the irony of the situation was not lost on anyone in the courtroom. The general who had questioned Martinez's qualifications was now being judged by one of the most qualified military judges in the nation. During a recess, Harrison approached the bench. "Ma'am, I want to formally apologize for my earlier comments. They were inappropriate and reflected poorly on my understanding of military justice." "General," Martinez replied, "your assumptions were understandable given the information available to you, but they illustrate exactly why we needed to conduct this evaluation. Military justice must be blind to rank when it comes to the law." The trial continued for 3 days. Martinez's handling of the complex war crimes charges impressed even the most experienced military lawyers in attendance. Her questions to witnesses were incisive, her rulings on evidence were scholarly, and her management of the courtroom was exemplary. When the jury returned with their verdict, guilty on 2 of the 4 charges, Martinez accepted it with the same impartiality she had shown throughout the trial. During sentencing, she delivered a judgment that balanced the serious nature of the crimes with Harrison's long record of service. "General Harrison," she said, "you have served this country with distinction for 4 decades. However, the law applies equally to all service members, regardless of rank or service record. The jury has found you guilty of violating the laws of war, and this court must impose appropriate consequences." After sentencing, Martinez addressed the courtroom one final time in her role as evaluator. "This trial has demonstrated both the strengths and challenges of our military justice system. On one hand, we saw how rank and appearance can influence perceptions of judicial authority. On the other hand, we've seen that when properly conducted, military courts can deliver fair verdicts regardless of the defendant's status." She paused, looking at the assembled officers. "The evaluation period is now complete. My report will go to the Secretary of the Army and will include recommendations for improving military justice training and procedures." In the weeks following the trial, Martinez's evaluation became the subject of intense discussion throughout the military legal community. Her report identified numerous instances where assumptions about judicial authority had affected courtroom dynamics, and her recommendations led to significant changes in how military legal personnel were trained. The Harrison trial itself became a landmark case, not just for its war crimes convictions but for the judicial procedures that surrounded it. Legal scholars wrote extensively about the Martinez evaluation and its implications for military justice reform. 6 months later, Martinez was promoted to Brigadier General and appointed as the military's first Deputy Judge Advocate General for Justice Reform. Her mandate was to implement the changes identified during her undercover evaluation and ensure that military courts maintained the highest standards of impartiality. During her promotion ceremony, General Harrison, who had been granted clemency and allowed to retire, approached her. "General Martinez," he said, "I want you to know that you taught me something important about assumptions and respect. I've recommended your approach to several other senior officers who need to learn the same lesson." "Thank you, General," she replied. "Sometimes the most important lessons come from the most unexpected sources." 2 years after the undercover evaluation, Martinez addressed a conference of military judges and legal officers. Her speech, titled "Justice Wears No Rank," became required reading at military law schools. "The law," she told the assembled audience, "recognizes no distinction between general and private, between senior and junior, between male and female. When we sit in judgment, we must embody that principle completely." She shared the story of the Harrison trial, emphasizing not the general's initial disrespect, but the learning that had emerged from the encounter. General Harrison's reaction was human and understandable. Most of us make assumptions based on appearance, age, and rank. The goal isn't to eliminate those assumptions entirely, it's to ensure they don't interfere with the administration of justice. In the audience, a young captain raised her hand. "Ma'am, how do we balance respect for rank with the independence necessary for judicial decision-making?" Martinez smiled, remembering her own questions as a junior officer. "Respect for rank is important in military culture, but when we enter a courtroom, we must remember that justice outranks everyone. The law is the only authority that matters in judicial proceedings." 5 years after the Martinez evaluation, military legal education had been transformed. New protocols ensured that all military personnel understood the independence of military judges and the proper respect due to judicial proceedings, regardless of the apparent characteristics of presiding officers. Martinez, now a 2-star general and Judge Advocate General of the Army, continued to champion reforms that strengthened military justice. Her influence extended beyond the courtroom to affect how the military approached questions of authority, respect, and fairness. In a final irony, one of her most successful initiatives initiatives was a mentorship program that paired senior officers with junior legal personnel. The program's motto, suggested by General Harrison himself, read, "Wisdom comes in many uniforms." During a visit to Fort Leavenworth, Martinez returned to the courtroom where the Harrison trial had taken place. The young officers now training there knew the story of the lieutenant who had shocked a general, but more importantly, they understood the principles that story represented. Standing at the judge's bench where she had revealed her true identity, Martinez reflected on the changes that had occurred. The military justice system was stronger, fairer, and more respected than ever before. But perhaps the most important change was the simplest. In military courtrooms across the nation, justice was now truly blind to rank, age, and gender. The law spoke with equal authority regardless of who wore the robes. As she left the courthouse, Martinez passed a young male lieutenant preparing for his first day as a military judge. He looked nervous, uncertain whether his youth and junior rank would undermine his authority. "Lieutenant," she said, stopping beside him, "remember that when you take that bench you represent something larger than rank or experience. You represent the law itself." "Yes, ma'am," he replied, "but what if senior officers don't respect my authority?" Martinez smiled, remembering a general who had learned that lesson the hard way. "Then you remind them, politely but firmly, that in a courtroom, justice outranks everyone." As she walked away, she could hear the lieutenant calling his first case to order. His voice was young but carried the authority of law, and that was exactly as it should be. The revolution hadn't been loud or dramatic. It had been quiet, methodical, and grounded in principle, but it had changed everything.